Hi everyone, this is Lisa Asari from AWS Educate. Thank you for joining the Supporting the Rapid Transition to Remote Learning webinar series from Amazon Web Services. Educators all over the world are having to shift to remote learning, some for the first time, and we wanted to do something to help ease that transition. This webinar series was created for educators by educators who have expertise in remote learning and can share their insights with you. The series runs through May 1st, so check back on the website to view the remaining webinar topics. Please note, you will be muted during this webinar, but we do want to hear from you, so please ask questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. We will answer throughout the presentation, and we will have time set aside at the end for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link both to the recording and a certificate of attendance following the webinar. With that, I'd like to introduce Tracy Steele from Stanford Online High School to discuss counseling and student support online with a focus on social and emotional learning.
Hi, I'm Tracy Steele, and I'm happy to be here presenting in today's webinar. Currently, I'm Director of Student Support at Stanford Online High School, and this is my 10th year. When I first arrived at Stanford OHS, I questioned whether I could actually support students virtually and online. However, shortly it became abundantly clear that not only could I support them, but that students benefited greatly from having some connections online with counseling and student support services. Our school recognized this and invested in our student support team, and today I oversee 10 members of our team who specialize in 3 specific areas, including academic advising, college counseling, and social emotional counseling. So as school counselors and all educators around the nation are quickly being tasked to translate their services online, my hope is that I can share some of what we've learned over this past decade as a resource to assist you in this unprecedented time. So first, I think it's important to take a look at the use of online technology in general, as well as the benefits and challenges of online school counseling. My colleagues, Carolyn Stone and Greg Knuckles and I, explored the question, to what extent have counselors been using online technologies to deliver services to students? And we surveyed 740 American School Counseling Association members in 2013 and 960 in 2017, and we really explored that question. What we found is that in the area of student support, system support, that is professional development, data and measurement, program management, that school counselors reported using these online technologies at least moderately, both in 2013 and again in 2017. However, in the areas of core curriculum and student planning, what we found was there was an actual increase in the use of online technologies in these areas. So from 2013, on average, school counselors reported using those online counseling technologies only rarely, but that went up to moderately in 2017. However, in the area of responsive services, school counselors reported using online technologies rarely, both in 2013, and that remained unchanged in 2017. Meanwhile, we also asked about school counselors reported comfort and compatibility with using online technologies to perform their counseling duties. As you can see by this table of responses, a majority of counselors, 57% in 2013, reported that online technologies were at least moderately, if not very or extremely compatible to their counseling duties. And this increased to 63% of the counselors in 2017. However, at the same time, a majority, 61% of school counselors reported feeling slightly or not at all comfortable using online technologies to perform their counseling duties in 2013. And this actually increased feeling slightly or not at all comfortable with using these technologies to 64% in 2017. So what this data shows us is that when we're now asking school counselors to respond and to support students online, many of them have less experience doing so and may feel uncomfortable. It's important to recognize that this is going to be a challenging time to make this transition. and that as we're asked to meet students where they are, it can be daunting and hard. So that's a given. It's going to be a challenge, but the positive news is that we have been doing this successfully, and there are ways to help move forward in this process. So as we move through this webinar, you're invited to take what works for you and leave the rest. School counselors and educators are vital during this time, and even though it's challenging, it really can make a huge difference in students' lives to have you there, to have your support, perhaps now more than ever. So take a big deep breath, it's possible, and let's talk a little bit about informing us around the benefits and the challenges of online counseling. So first, let's take a look at the benefits. And there's quite a few of them that have been researched over the past decade in terms of providing school counseling services online. The first is perhaps the accessibility. So students can now reach out to their counselors in the comfort of their own home or their own bedroom. And this allows some students to feel safer and less emotionally exposed. They don't have to walk into a guidance counseling office. They don't have to see their peers. They can actually reach out a lot more conveniently in this type of setting. Students also have more opportunities to control the disclosure of how they want to relate and get help with their counselor. So for students who might use video conferencing technologies like we are, they might just use the chat feature to start a conversation with a counselor. Or they might choose to come on mic and camera. But those choices are theirs, and it gives them a little bit of an ability to be in the driver's seat when they're deciding how much and in what way to disclose this information. And then finally, as we know, teens and students are pretty comfortable in this environment. They're used to being online. And so in a lot of cases, they might actually prefer counseling with someone in an online space rather than face-to-face. Yet, along with the benefits, there come inherent limitations to online counseling and major challenges. So the first, of course, is privacy. When I'm working with a student, I'm not certain for sure if there is the family behind them or in the other room that can possibly overhear that. So we'll talk a little bit about helping to address those, but privacy can be an issue along with technical issues. It may be that not all issues are suitable for online counseling. So for example, if you're having a small group around a difficult or personal topic, a small group counseling session, you may want to postpone that until you're back on site. Because you can't guarantee privacy, if you're working with a small group of students, you want to be aware that things might be overheard. And so that could be an activity that possibly waits until you're back in the brick and mortar setting. There's also issues of counselor boundaries and responding to crisis that really need to be thought through as you move into this sphere, and we'll talk a little bit about how to address those challenges. So section 1 takeaways: be aware of the benefits and challenges to offering counseling services online. Leverage the benefits and address the challenges, and we'll talk a little bit about addressing the challenges coming up here. And then decide which types of counseling services and support to offer initially and to build up over time. So remember, Rome was not built in a day, and you're there to offer support to students and to decide which activities you can reasonably and safely do in this online environment, and then build up from that point. Okay, so moving on to considerations. What do counselors working in an online setting need to consider that differ from traditional brick and mortar settings? I think one of the biggest issues that we found that are important to address are boundaries. So it's really important that, you know, when you're online, you're communicating with students and families your days and hours of availability. Unlike at a brick and mortar setting where you might be able to go to campus and then leave, it becomes much more difficult in some ways to sort of be offline. So it's really important that you communicate those and maintain your boundaries. So when doing so, there are many different ways to do that. You can send an email to students and families. You can post your hours on your website, but it's important to make those known and then to maintain those boundaries. So when you're in the evening time away from work, it's going to be much more difficult to respond to a student issue when you're in that setting than when you're at your workstation, when it's during the daytime and there might be other agencies or referrals that you can contact. So just keeping in mind your availability and maintaining those boundaries. One way to do that is to avoid using personal devices for professional communication. So we really suggest using school-issued devices, if that might be a telephone or a computer that you can use solely for your counseling services. This is important not only to maintain boundaries, so you're not picking up the phone and it's a student or family where you're not in the best position to help, but also because a lot of the school-issued devices may have higher levels of security and encryption, and the schools are working on those issues so that you don't have to do all of that back work. Now, there's ideal versus real, and in unprecedented times, you might not have the type of equipment that you need. In that case, talking with your administrator and your principal to decide if you have to use your personal devices, what might that look like, and how can you work to maintain those boundaries despite perhaps those limitations. Moving on to setting, we talked a little bit about this, but really to have a productive counseling session or even educational session with students, it's important to have a quiet space for you to be able to pay attention to the student in front of you or students and help them to find that space. Sometimes it might not be possible, in which case if they can have access to headphones or you can use headphones, that can also help in the challenging situations. Not to recommend this, but I've had students go out to their car and sit in their car and have a conversation because that was the quietest place that they could find and they really wanted to chat privately. So, you know, if there's a space, there's a time that works for your students to get together and help them realize that having that uninterruptions can be beneficial if possible. And finally, really deciding what is appropriate modes of communication. So it might be possible to discuss course planning via email, where other more complicated issues might be best addressed over the phone or with video conferencing. Recognizing, of course, that schools differ in their policies and their platforms, but really being clear with what might be better addressed with a quick phone call than a long chain of emails. So finally, as you make your boundaries known to family and students, it's really also important in this type of environment to provide for students emergency and after hours resources. So if they can't get a hold of you, they can go on to, whether it's a website or if you've emailed them a list of resources so that they can get the help that they need in real time. We provide at Stanford hotlines for the National Suicide Prevention. Students can get on with a trained counselor at any time to talk about suicide ideation if that's what they're experiencing. We also have domestic abuse information, eating disorders, anything that really can present a problem for students right now and for families. So providing that somewhere that's very accessible. So we don't put it behind our portal where students have to remember their passwords. It's really on our public website because we want it to be easily accessible to students. Recognizing again that even when you do have office hours or you are available, you might be working with another student. So providing these and help training students to go to those resources when you're not available can be really vital. All right, and one of the things that educators, but in particular that counselors may deal with are student crises. And this can take many forms, but you can imagine during your course of work, you might receive an email from a student who is really concerned about their friend, and they might feel that their friend is, experienced suicide ideation. You may have an issue that you're working with, and one-on-one that you're concerned about regarding a student. So really having a plan and protocol for crisis situations ahead of time can be very helpful in how you decide to manage that. These protocols are going to be very similar to what you already have in a brick and mortar. It's basically you want to get the student help in a safe way as soon as possible. Whenever a student may be in danger of serious and foreseeable harm, contacting parents and guardians as soon as possible is even more important in an online context. And this is because unlike a school where we have access to the student and can make sure that they're sitting with us until we release them to their parents, we don't have that kind of access. So making sure where we can get a hold of the parent who has the student's best interest in mind most of the time, most likely, and also has the ability to make sure that they can monitor their student, is going to be really, really important. So if you have any doubts, if you have any concerns, it's really important that you call the parents or the guardians. Well, what if you try to call and you can't get a hold of a parent or a guardian or an emergency contact? If the danger to a student is acute and parents and guardians are not immediately available, we've had success by contacting local first responders where the students live and asking for a welfare check. So in this case, the local, whether it could be the police, they often bring a social worker, will go to the student's home and will check to see how the student is doing, and they're usually great at that point providing the services that that student may need. So we found that to be a useful emergency protocol plan if we are unable to contact the family. So these questions and examples of these protocols, as well as questions about informed consent, some counselors may need them, some may not. Those can be found on the American School Counselor Association's website. So I really encourage you to take a look at those resources on that website in that link. So section 2 takeaway. If you haven't done so yet and you're working online, make sure to establish those boundaries. Consider your setting. Make after hours and emergency resources available 24/7. That means on a website or send it to students, something that they're able to print out and have. Create a protocol for student crises. Make sure to run that protocol by your administration and your principal. And finally, be informed of ethical and legal considerations. So the American School Counseling Association is one great resource to go to do that. Finally, for the majority of the presentation, I just wanted to go over a few types of lessons and activities that counselors and other educators can offer online to enhance students' social and emotional development. In this time of uncertainty and stress, this type of support is probably more necessary than at any other time. So what are some of the things that we do at Stanford Online High School and other schools online to help support students? And the way that I've organized this is to look at the types of services we offer asynchronously, and that means by email, by discussion boards. They're on the student learning management system we could send pre-recorded videos or YouTube videos. These are also things like apps that students can download and use on their own. So there's a lot of different ways for counselors and educators to support students asynchronously. A couple of the key areas that we found work well are in time management and goal setting. So some examples of this are documents, just providing shared documents or standalone documents to students. And these could be, on the example here, we have Stanford Online High School, a simple Excel spreadsheet where students write down their courses, they write down their assignments and due dates, and they also write the date that they'd like to have it submitted. We often encourage students to submit it ahead of the deadline so that they have a little bit of cushion room if they've got tech issues, etc. So that's one example. We found Stanford's Challenge Success Group, which is an organization, has a great time management worksheet that really encourages students to schedule in downtime and playtime, family time into their schedule. And so we feel that this is a really great idea for students. As I mentioned before, there's the meditation apps and videos you might send to students. You could have discussion boards. For PE, sometimes students go and do their own physical activity, and then we have them talk about it in discussion boards with other students. And finally, there's a lot of online communities that you can refer students to that might be helpful for them during this time. So for examples, LGBTQ identifying students might appreciate the Trevor Project website and community group. There's also the types of interactive asynchronous technologies that work really well as well. So thinking about this topic of goal setting, one of the things that we like to work with our students on is developing a growth mindset around achieving goals. And how this works is that we would create this document for them and share it with the student, and we'll have a copy as well. We ask the student to fill out the worksheet. Their first question is to describe a recent school-related assignment or task where they stumbled, failed, or didn't meet expectations. So they go through a series of the questions describing how it felt, how they responded to those feelings. And one of the big keys here related to mindset is asking them, what can I do differently next time? So oftentimes with growth mindset, we think about effort being more important than praise, but we also have to recognize that in order to get different outcomes, students really need to reflect and identify what they might change to be able to have that different outcome. So we really focus on that with students. And as you can see in this example, the student writes their responses and the counselor then uses the comment app to really engage in a discussion to expand students' thinking. And this is a great way to establish a connection asynchronously that can be ongoing over the few weeks that you might be online or the few months. There's also a number of college and career-related resources that are easily accessible asynchronously. Our Director of College Counseling, Adam Lips, has put together a great set of resources for educators and counselors, and you can go to this set of resources on the tiny URL link at the bottom of the page. He put together things like virtual college visit links. So for students that aren't able to go out and visit colleges right now, a lot of colleges have created virtual college. So you can go to this website to check those out or send your student towards that website. Other documents and resources Dr. Lips created have been things like a college list rubric. So it's a set of metrics, both external metrics related to college GPAs, average GPAs, etc., but also personal metrics, the types of institutions, whether a student wants to go to a small private school or a larger research institution, and they're able to go and fill these out to help them to narrow down the right fit college. So we often get a lot of students coming seeking brand name colleges, understandably, but we really help them to understand what is it that they're looking for. There's over 200 highly selective universities in the nation, and trying to help them identify their metrics so that they can get a right fit. And there's also some self-evaluations to help in that process that Dr. Lips has graciously provided. So check out that information. There's also a lot of career exploration resources, and I'll point you to another link that will have information there, but students can go and explore different careers online at their own pace. Okay, so moving on to synchronous platforms. And when we talk about synchronous, we mean video conferencing platforms like Zoom, like Adobe Connect, that you can have real-time conversations with students on. And so here's an example of some of our students. I think this is in a student life event, but these are great for check-ins, academic advising, workshops, and mini courses. Peer support groups also work really well. Our Director of Counseling, Greg Knuckles, who I'll talk about in a little bit, he offers students a 6 to 8 week course or peer support group. It's actually a small group where students may come in and they can focus on things like time management, goal setting, and students help each other and hold each other accountable in these areas. So before, when I mentioned some groups may not be suitable for the online environment, there could be some really important small groups that can be. And so peer support groups focused on stress reduction or time management might be a really great opportunity for students during this time. So meeting one-to-one with students, this is our middle school counselor here, Ms. Frietas, and a couple key points when if you get the opportunity to meet one-to-one. And I know that some schools have very large counseling loads, so it may not be possible to meet students one-on-one. For us, what we do is we prioritize students that might be struggling. And how we do this is that we send out grade notifications. And so we collect this information once a month, and we can see if students have dropped their grades, and that's a proxy for needing assistance. And so we prioritize checking in with students across aspects like grade notifications or referrals from students or families. In doing one-to-one and small groups, it's really important to have a scheduling tool that works well. We've used the scheduling tool most recently called Calendly, and what we like about that tool is that you can offer students check-ins as brief as 10 minutes or as long as an hour, and so they can choose the amount of time that they're comfortable or that they feel that they need, and that then updates on your side, your calendar, and you can limit the number of sessions per day that you may want to schedule. So these kinds of calendar tools are really helpful for managing schedules. It's important to note, are you going to meet with a student by phone, by text, and or by video conferencing? And then what's the purpose? Is this a routine academic check-in? Are you just checking in on how they're doing? Or are there other issues that you want to come away with from that meeting, including certain goals or projects? So those are the kinds of things when meeting that you might want to consider. I know for Dr. Lips, especially in college counseling, he, by the end of a session, he wants students to think about and submit college lists where they think they're going to go. So each counseling session may be different and may have a different purpose. All right, hanging in there. We're getting to the last part of this webinar, which really focus on what types of social and emotional learning activities can educators and counselors in general do with their students that are really, in which you can really do well online. So this first activity is actually been introduced by our high school counselor, Andrew Satanapong, and he designed it from the actual course that was developed at Stanford called Design Your Life. And he uses this activity both, it could be as a check-in with students, or he may use it in one of our wellness courses, etc. So as we move here, and this activity can be found on Designing Your Life on their website. And you might just want to take a pen or just consider this in your head as we move through this first activity. So first, you see this dashboard, and think of it as a gas tank maybe, where 0 is empty and when you get to full there. And there's 4 components of your dashboard: love, play, work, and health. And right now, think about where each of those elements are in your life and really fill out, or if you have a pen, highlight your dashboard as it currently exists. So what do you notice about your dashboard? We're looking at Andrew's dashboard. What I notice is that, his work and health are pretty okay. His love is quite full, which is great, but his play is really down, and he's noticed that too, I think, by marking it in red. Then you can ask students, if you could make one incremental adjustment, what would it be? And then redraw your improved dashboard. So for Andrew, he included more play. So when you think about it, what would you get if you could attain this level of balance? And how would it change your life for you? If I were to look at this in my own life, I might say, well, if I increase play, I think my health would go up because I love playing tennis. So I would get a better workout. And maybe even my love would go up because it would de-stress me and I could be more patient with my family members. My work, maybe that would go down a little bit because maybe I can't work on the weekends or at night or times that I'm not able to work, or just we have to reduce work a little bit in general. And, how would that feel? How would that be? So what would it take for you to live this way for 2 weeks? And then for me, I would probably say I'd have to schedule in more opportunities for play. Otherwise, it would disappear. So helping students to kind of go through that in their personal life can help them to identify what areas they want to change and how that could impact both positively and negatively other aspects of their life. Another type of workshop we offer students is around adolescent development. And Dr. Greg Knuckles is our director of counseling, and he offers a growth mindset workshop. And while they're focused on 4 different topics, we're just going to look at some elements of the first topic, which is growth mindset, which we discussed a little bit earlier. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is the benefits of using something like a video conferencing tool when working with students. And one benefit here is that you can provide students a blank screen. We do this on Adobe Connect, but you could do it on Zoom or other platforms. And we ask students, what is a growth mindset? Students are then able, with drawing tools, to type out what they believe that is, and it populates on the screen, but doesn't put who it's from. So students can engage in this conversation anonymously and create a safe space to help them explore topics like what is a growth mindset, or even how they're feeling today. So the benefit of this type of connection is that students can really contribute anonymously in this way. So in this particular lesson, we might have them write all of the things that come to them when they think of growth mindset. And then Greg would then discuss basically the concept of growth mindset. He might discuss the research around it. We would usually have discussion questions, maybe breakout rooms for students to discuss these a little bit longer. Another thing that is, again, with this idea that students can type directly in, is that they can then go and fill out a chart online, which include asking them to fill out what are fixed mindsets and how we might change those to growth mindsets. So we might ask students, what are some fixed mindsets that they currently hold, and how might that look different if they changed it? Sometimes if we ask students if they're having trouble, we say, well, what would you say to a friend? And sometimes that's easier for them to find a growth mindset approach when they're counseling a friend. So some examples that we've had with students is that they might just say, I'm just not good at math. And then we help them to rephrase that and to have self-talk that centers around this idea that struggling to learn skills and content from math means that my brain is growing and I'm getting more knowledgeable in this area. We also find, again, that students, it's not only effort, but it's also strategy. So if we look at this last question, students often say, well, if I just study harder, if I just spend more time rereading this assignment, I'll get it. I'll start to understand it. But we know that might not really be the case. Sometimes our students spend way too long on assignments instead of changing their approach. So we help students to consider questions like, how can I find new strategies or approaches on this topic, assignment, or a problem in a new way? This goes along with encouraging students to reach out to their teacher or peer and really help them to identify a different strategy to use to see if they can come to a different result. All right, so those are examples of how you can use the online conferencing tools to create some interaction and learning with students in this area. Finally, the last activity that we'll go through today is empathy circles. And here, this is a concept that is really based on this skill of active listening. And we've worked with Edwin Rush, who runs a Building a Culture of Empathy organization. And we really built on this idea of online empathy circles with him. And so what we're really working on with students is how to help them to be good and active listeners, skills that counselors often practice in their training as they move into the field. What's useful about this is right now, with a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty, being able just to share feelings and to be heard are real powerful ways to reduce stress and to create a sense of belonging. So having students come together in small groups for empathy circles is a really great way that we can be helpful in this time and place. So as you can see, this is an example of perhaps a small group, and there's 15 students in this group. What we would do is we would create 5 breakout rooms of 3 students each, and we would put the students in those breakout rooms. We would then give instructions that ask the speaker to describe an experience using the prompt that has been given, or for them to choose a prompt to talk about. And the listener will strive to empathically understand the speaker's experience and communicate this understanding back to the speaker. And the observer will attentively listen and notice what's going on. Now, this is a little easier said than done, especially for the listener. So after students get a chance at listening and at speaking, we bring them back. As the listener, we ask them, what was their experience of the exercise? What did they feel went well, and what were challenging? For the speaker, how did it feel to receive the listener's attention? How does it differ from how you might feel in an ordinary informal conversation? So these opportunities really help students to practice that listening skill and to implement it now so that they can both express their feelings, but more importantly, be of help, be of service by listening to others. So these are just a few activities that I wanted to point out. These and other resources and lessons are available at the American School Counselor Association's Ask a Toolkit at that link. You can also go to Stanford Online High School and our how-to series to find more information and resources around these topics. A few takeaways here is that your practice should drive the tech you use, not the other way around. So it can be very overwhelming to try to go through all the technology, all the apps and the resources that are out there. My suggestion is really to think about what are your needs at the moment? What are your practices that you'd like to do? And then backwards plan through the tech that may be best to use them. Make sure to evaluate the tech that you're using with an eye on security and privacy, as well as informing administration and getting approval before recommending certain apps to students, of course. So takeaways from this last section: student support can be offered both asynchronously and synchronously. And it's really important to consider your school context and student needs when deciding on what and how to deliver counseling and student support services. All right, thank you for listening, and we'll now open it up to Q&A.
A big thanks to Tracy Steele for sharing her expertise with us. And thank you everyone for your active participation. We really appreciate all the questions and comments we've received so far. As I mentioned earlier, we will be hosting more webinars on remote learning. We're also hosting office hours to answer questions you might have. You can find information for both the webinar series and office hours on the webpage shown on the screen and in the chat. A link to the recording of this webinar and a certificate of completion will be sent to you via email within 24 hours. And lastly, you will see a survey pop up when you close the webinar. Please provide your feedback on the survey so we can improve these webinars. Now we will continue to answer questions through the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel until the top of the hour. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for everyone who has asked questions in the pane. We're going to continue to take questions, but we're also going to do a live Q&A here. So starting with one question, I think that is a good discussion, is would you recommend the trend of education continuing in the same fashion now as in crisis?
Oh, that's a great question. And, you know, I think I sort of alluded to it, but I think it depends. Our students find coming to Stanford Online High School is so rewarding because they get to interact with students despite their geographical location. So they get to interact with students all over the world and learn together in these small virtual classrooms. So the benefit there is great because you have access to teachers and to peers that you might not have in your specific location. For me, I think there's so many benefits to what's happening with technology that even in schools we might see a change where there may be more opportunities for students to do more individual learning during the school hour, while also having opportunities for peer-to-peer interactions, etc. So I really think that a hybrid model might be something that could be really beneficial, where we provide opportunities for students exactly where they are academically in different ways, but also continue to use those in the classroom, but continue to provide that space for peer-to-peer, teacher-to-student activities, because teachers are essential to this. Building a community is really essential online. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I've learned, is that when we first started at Stanford OHS, we thought, oh, students want to just plow through the material and really go quickly, and they don't care about being in person, being, I guess, virtually in a class. But that was farther from the truth. In fact, they really wanted to have the live sessions, the classroom online peer experience. So I think that however we do it, we still need, teachers are experts and counselors at that relationship building, and that's what we need to remember as we build through here. So I think for students, it's possibly going to be a net positive as more and more technologies come to help us innovate in education.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about your student population and kind of the sort of time zones that you help serve?
Sure. So we have 850 students, of which half go full-time and half go part-time. And our students it's very similar to Stanford's demographics, where a lot of students come from California, Texas, and New York are other big hubs where we attract students, but really we have students all around the nation and the globe. We have about 15% of our students, 12 to 15% come from come internationally from all over Australia, countries in Africa, Europe, and Japan. And what we have to do is we offer classes from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. at night. And so for students in different time zones, they do have probably less of a choice on classes, but that way students can take classes and we can accommodate them via those different time zones.
And when you talk about the building communities and some of the activities that seem more synchronous, sort of what are the either challenges or surprises around working with students that are sort of so geographically spread?
Well, I think the benefits from that are that, when you're talking about a class like we have democracy, freedom, and the rule of law, it's a philosophy and history class, and we have students, coming in from Russia and some in Japan, some in California, rural Alabama, LA, and you really discuss these types of questions, you're really going to get a different perspective and experience. So this true opportunity for diverse perspectives is really inherent in that kind of environment. And then just, the peer-to-peer, they'll walk around, your living space or your outdoor space in different cities is just interesting as well. And then our students, we have meetups. Now, again, the access is going to be different, but students hold meetups in different places and they really get to meet peers from around the world. So that opportunity, I think, is really priceless for really getting to connect with others and hear diverse opinions.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So we are getting a number of questions just about the resources themselves. I just want to let everybody know that any of the links that you saw throughout the webinar are posted in the chat, as well as you'll be receiving the recording of this afterwards. And in talking a little bit about some of these resources, I know educators often get a lot of quantity, but it's always the question of how do I really understand what resources are going to work for my student population? What are the strategies or things that you've used to help really cull down to the things that work for you and for your students?
Yeah. Again, I think it's kind of thinking about, the translation. So what do you want? What's your goal? So if your goal is connecting with students, then you might think about what are the ways I can do that? And so it might be a survey that you provide, a Survey Monkey type of survey, or if it's, connection, maybe you have a peer support group and you get 10 students together sort of on Zoom for a 5-session experience where they can talk about just how they're doing, connections. It could be a student-led peer support group. So I think what you need to figure out first is what are the things that you want to do? What are your goals? And then work backwards. Another goal is, providing students with opportunities for stress relief. So you might think about what are apps out there that would be appropriate for the students. And again, that's going to be a challenge because you want to make sure that there's security and that they're not taking student data. So you really want to check out apps with your school, but your school may have those, or YouTube meditation videos, sending those to students, and then just, giving them a Google shared document where they respond to that. Or you could even start conversations like, how are you doing? And it could be a running log where they respond. So it really depends on your context, because our school, there's some counselors and some teachers that have huge caseloads and others that have very small caseloads. So again, I would say figure out what your needs are and then work backwards. And I did provide some of those. I'm curating some of these lessons in the American School Counseling Association's toolkit. If you don't have access to that, we'll also be putting up and continue to put up more activities, lessons, platform options in our Stanford Online High School. So if that's not up yet, it will be, but people are asking about what types of platforms there are, and there's a list that I have of links to different platforms, including Adobe, Zoom, Google Classroom, etc. So those can check back at Stanford Online High School shortly as we get those resources up as well.
Wonderful. And it does look like, I know you commented on earlier that you'd be able to access these series for free. So appreciate the sort of access to these resources. When we think about sort of the levels and working with these different students, there's been a question or two on adapting to different age groups, so potentially younger students. What might be suggestions for how you might work with the younger students?
Yeah, that's a great question. My experience isn't in that area, but what I would say is that there might be opportunities for bringing in parents, right? And so having sort of parent-student type of book club or read aloud could be opportunities for connection there. The American School Counseling Association, and I believe those are free resources, I need to check, but they have an elementary school virtual toolkit there for elementary students. So I think, again, working with younger students, I would say keeping the interaction shorter, and then really maybe I've seen folks reading to students. You can read and talk about how characters feel, how characters might respond, and so those are opportunities to create social emotional learning within a small group of elementary school students. But yeah. So there's just limited, my focus is on middle school, high school, but there are more and more resources out there for the younger kids. And I think it's quite challenging because of that age and the attention. So I think it's even more challenging at the younger ages.
Yeah. So switching over a little bit, this growth mindset concept is wonderful. I love it. And what tool were you using to sort of capture anonymous comments for completing some of the activities that you showed during your presentation?
Right, so we use an Adobe Connect platform, and that is a video conferencing tool where we can, we have our students in the classroom, and so we can give them drawing tools to be able to do that anonymously. There's also, and so Zoom, all the different platforms may have different opportunities, but oftentimes they do have drawing tools, and students can usually type in things directly onto a slide. But the chat feature works really well too. And so if folks are, I know Zoom's very popular and we're using Zoom a lot. The thing about students is that, and this type of classroom, is that there's a lot of engagement because students are used to chatting, texting. So it's not just like the one teacher, one student type of environment. You can be talking to a group and there could be the text chat going on where students are expanding on ideas or, asking questions. And so it takes a little getting used to, but there's very dynamic interaction in the classroom in ways that may actually be more useful in that than in a typical classroom where the side conversations may be more distracting versus helpful. So I would say the Zoom environment is just really a good place to have small groups come together. And we have also for a lot of activities are just really fun activities. So we could have, especially younger students, again, pet day, just bring your pet and, put your cat up at the camera, and students love that. And it gets them talking. It feels like, oh, I see my peers, I see my teacher, counselor. Just having those kinds of opportunities where they can come in, show it on their camera, type hi to their friend while the teacher's talking. Usually that can go well. Sometimes you have to monitor it, but there's just a lot of opportunity there for those virtual classrooms to be very dynamic environments for students.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking a lot about students being used to technology, how do you maybe get students to engage in counseling or areas where it is more sensitive of a topic in a remote situation where they might be reluctant?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think building trust takes time, but for our students, and especially the research shows for students that experience social anxiety, having an online session can actually be less threatening and more engaging, because students often, and people often disclose more actually online than they might in person, at least at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So what we do, I've had students that have been somewhat reluctant, and we, whether it's through a Skype platform or a Zoom chat, we can just start by just chatting. They don't have to come on, they don't have to show their face if they're not comfortable. And once you build the trust of just having that check-in that's by text, sometimes then they start to realize, oh, if I get on mic, it'll be more efficient. And so there's been a lot of great building relationships, starting really with a very low bar of just checking in and using a Skype, like, hey, how are you doing? To engage in students in a very non-threatening sort of way.
Yeah, that's great with a check-in and just using like technology that's comforting, as well as that trust building for sure. Related to that, I guess we have a question from Jeff. Do your counselors provide telehealth for individual student wellness? If so, do you have a sample consent form? Or if not, how do you support student mental health?
Yeah, that's a great point. So our counselors, for the social emotional counselors, we do, short-term confidential counseling, and that usually runs about 10 sessions per student in the area of mental health. And again, it's not clinical, so we're not offering therapy. If we find students really need more than that short-term support, then we refer to their community, to their resources in their own community. So we offer it in that way, but we also offer a program which is a wellness program for our 9th and 10th graders. And in this program, we provide what we call wellness coaches. So they're both counselors and just faculty, teachers that act as a wellness coach. And what students do is weekly, we have them write on a Google Doc. We'll provide a prompt like, hey, how has COVID impacted you? Or we go around the social CASEL, which is CASEL. CASEL has a great Center for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, has a great framework that has responsible decision making, 5 different components. So we may ask questions around different aspects of their social emotional development. And that weekly response where they write on the Google Doc and we respond provides that interaction. And then we meet with a student via video conferencing. So there's 9th graders all have access to a wellness coach. They all receive this weekly prompt, and they also, we provide them in their learning management system articles, videos around topics around wellness. So there's a very proactive approach we have with all students around those topics of mental health and wellness.
Got it. And for folks who are sort of just starting their journey of putting together a program like you've been talking about, I guess what would you offer as the most important thing for them to keep in mind as they start this?
Yeah, I think that, again, just starting slowly and just checking in with students. A lot of what we've learned over the time, myself as an educator and counselor, is from listening to students and helping understand what they know. And oftentimes students are your best resources. So they've helped create student guides on online resources. They're out there sort of pushing the envelope. And so, you can, we have counseling advisory students that work sort of with us, and they can help curate material that might be appropriate out there. So that could be stress relieving videos or other kinds of articles that might be useful for students. So I would say, 1, start slowly. 2, get some students that are respected and knowledgeable to help collaborate with you to both find resources that are useful to students, but also to get students to want to participate in counseling or in peer support groups and that kind of thing. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask students what they need and kind of ask them if they can help as well in appropriate ways.
That's wonderful. So I think just with that, we'll go ahead and close. No, sorry, those are more logistical questions. We'll close the Q&A here. Again, Tracy, thank you so much for your time and your work, as well as answering these questions during this very uncertain time. I know we've been super appreciative. Just as another reminder in terms of some of the logistics of when we're going to be sending out the webinar recording. So you will get a recording link of this webinar via email. You will also receive a certificate of participation in that same email within 24 hours of concluding the webinar. Additionally, we're going to be posting all of the webinars on the AWS Educate website. We're also going to be posting all of these webinars on YouTube, and therefore they will be available in about more than 100 languages translated up there within a few days. So please check back on our website to find more information on other webinars. But I want to conclude today's with a big thank you for participating and asking some great questions, and to Tracy Steele for sharing her expertise with us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.